Representative Mike Honda is here. We've asked him to say a few words. Congressman Honda is from San Jose, our neck of the woods. I'm always glad to California stuff. He's been very, very helpful in supporting us for this. His staff, Victoria, is great. But also last fall, the Insight Center did a briefing on Capitol Hill. And his staff helped us do that. We had a lot of people show up. Maybe it's because we had it at lunch and a lot of food. But it was very good, and it was on minority and women-owned businesses. Representative Honda is the chair of the Asian Pacific American Caucus, Congressional Asian Pacific Congressional Caucus. He's on the Appropriations Committee, and he's the chair of the Congressional Ethiopian Caucus. He has a history of working across groups, which makes it very appropriate for our group. So, Congressman.
Thank you. It's the right height for me. They said I'm going to create it equally. I don't think so. Insight, color of wealth. That's green, ain't it? No? Well, someone was talking about opening up Cuba because somebody in Cuba said that they'll buy everything from us in cash. So all the folks who were favoring sanctions, you know, the guys from the Midwest and other persuasions, all of a sudden wanted to trade with Cuba. I said, oh, green trumps red. So it's great that we have a summit here, and the topic, I guess, was how to close the racial gap in economic security and mobility that exists in the United States. It's a slant. So, and it was an insight. So I thought I'd just sort of go off point, because I think a lot of you have talked about wealth and institutional racism. We know that there's high poverty rate in a lot of our communities, most of our communities that's non-white. We see that 10% of Asian Americans compared to 8.2% of non-Hispanic whites live at poverty. 2.2% of Asian Americans compared to 1.3% of Caucasians live on public assistance. We got statistics about Hmongs and Cambodians and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You all have that, and I understand a lot of you are PhDers and economics and philosophy and all the subjects in college I avoided. I had a reason. Books were too thick, pages too glossy, and there was no pictures. So I went into Hilda Solis. I'm going to talk about her in a minute. Yeah.
Tell her to come over and join us.
I'll do that in a second. Well, what I wanted to do was, I think that we can draw some conclusions with your background. Number one, you're all smarter than I am because you did all those classes that I avoided. And you can cognitively, determine certain kinds of things just through reading and talking and stuff like that. I need to touch it, put it in my mouth, I need to use all my sensories. And I'm 67, so I arrived at a point where you are already there. You're probably 30s, low 40s. Mi hermano aquí es más que 60 años, ¿verdad? No. How old are you?
You're about my age.
67, huh? But I think that we can assume that we all understand what discrimination is. We understand institutional racism. If we hadn't read the book, we felt it, we've seen it. Sometimes I was part of it. We understand the kinds of change that you and I want to see. And some of the things that we've gone through we sort of come to a point where we understood that institutional racism is sometimes also kinds of senses that and misinformation that we have about ourselves and how we act upon it, or how we act upon others based upon those notions, and we're all about unlearning the bad stuff and relearning the new stuff. And I think that you're all here and excited because it appears that we have an opportunity in this government now, that we have someone in the administration that knows how to think and read for himself. You know, and it's not to say he's perfect. You know, nobody is. They crucified the last guy. And so, the point I'm trying to make is that the excitement is good. The changes, the expectation is real. I mean, you know, we got Stephen Chu, the smartest man I know, for energy. You know, we got Shinseki, the man with integrity that told Cheney and Rumsfeld what it was, and they got rid of him. We got Tammy Duckworth, you know, helping out. We got Gary Locke, Commerce, after the third try, you know. Obama says after the third try, you got to get something right, and he did. So we do have someone right. I just mentioned the Asians, but we have a Holder AG. And we know that we're going to get real justice, not just ICE. You can do puns all night, right? But what I did want to talk about is kick off on, because I think other people talk about other stuff. I'm an educator. I went through this journey of life looking at how youngsters grow up, what happens to us in our environment, and who does what to us, and about government. Yeah, sometimes government makes mistakes, and sometimes they do it on purpose. And this is the era when we can really determine and uncover a lot of that stuff to determine for ourselves what is right and what is wrong, which direction to take. This whole theme about change, and we can do it. He says we can do it, not I can do it. So one of the things I sort of want to lay out there as a challenge is that those of us who are out there now, that we don't allow the right-wing TV and the radios to jam the airspace with their stuff. When they do, we have to be there, you know, countering it. Because you have the intellect, you have the articulation to be able to do that in ways that people can understand and hear. Because, you know, Obama can't do it himself. The cabinet can't do it themselves. The Democrats as politicians elected can't do it ourselves. But they have to hear it from folks like yourselves. And they have to hear it often and clearly, emphatically, in ways that make sense. And we have the time to do that. Because I don't want him to leave dissatisfied. I think he should have some satisfaction in his office, and he has come, as Dickens had said, in the best of times and in the worst of times. And that we know that he knows that in order to get out of a hole, you got to stop digging. And he's stopped everything. Gitmo, Abu Ghraib, he's changing things around. And in less than 100 days, through the democratic process and those of us who are in Congress and the Senate, we've been partners. And he's been criticized that it's not his plan. It was Barney's, it was Pelosi's, it was Reed's. You know, he's smart. He went to folks who know how to do it on a day-to-day basis, is to give him the plan. And it met his standards, and he signed it. And he keeps on saying is that the problems that we're suffering right now, I inherited it. And we got to remind people, because in politics, if you haven't noticed, politicians and the public have a 3 to 6 month memory span. And then afterwards they start hearing the mantras that the other sides keep saying. We could have done it with half the money, get twice the impact. They lie. It's because they, you know, I'm being partisan, but I'm being truthful. People who lie, steal, and steal have no compunction about the truth. Okay? And so, you want me to stop?
No.
Oh. I'm just getting started because this is an audience that wants to talk to. So, and I know Sister Lee here has got a lot of patience, so she knows that I talk a lot. So, you know, we have to be allies and cohorts for the administration for what he believes in, because 3/5 of the population voted men. 3/5, and that's a great majority. And it's interesting that the founding of our Constitution was written that all men are created equal except slaves, and slaves were 3/5 of a human. It's interesting now, he won with 3/5 of the votes. So there's an irony, but there's a prediction in there. So one of the things I'd like for you to think about in this context of wealth and change and policy is equity. Equity in education, with not equal funding for all children, but equity for each child. And that means a lot. That's much different than saying all children should have equal education. It's different because we're going specific to the child. So we have to be very astute on the language of policy making and how we think. And we got to think precisely. And I could talk more about equity in education and how it affects our community and the issue of wealth. But let me move on to another point. And this point is this, that children go to school and the school's composition is made up by the neighborhood. And the neighborhood is reflecting zoning. And the kind of activities, the people who control the zoning determines what kind of community is going to be developed out there. And I think what I'd like to leave with you is this thought. There's a couple of places where the landscape is changing. Southeast, next to the ballpark. 2 years ago, that community looked different than it is today. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just take a trip on South Capitol, look to your left. And then imagine a community that has no amenities, no high rises, streets that were not well kept, trees. It was a neighborhood that was forgotten. Poor people. Then all of a sudden you had a stadium built there. Redevelopment comes in. But the law doesn't have anything in there that says thou shalt keep a percentage of folks that will reflect, that will have children and families that will reflect better the composition of schools, that will provide more equity for children growing up. I know that the community has changed. I know how it was done. I know why they're doing it. But they forgot that they needed a balanced community. So where did those folks go? That I don't know. I do know they got pushed out. Hunters Point. Anybody know about Hunters Point? Yeah, it's an area that before the war, during the war, they built ships and people lived there. And after the war, it turned into a neighborhood that nobody wanted to live in except people who couldn't afford to live anywhere else. And they looked like Samoans, African Americans, Hispanics, Hmongs, Cambodians. People who couldn't afford to live anywhere else lived there. Then all of a sudden people started to realize that the Bay has a great view. It's $1 million view, but folks with $1 million don't live there. A ballpark was built right down there. Then all of a sudden the neighborhood changed. It's called redevelopment. Again, poor people got pushed out and being pushed out, and they can't even afford to live in a one-room studio that oversees the Bay. There's something wrong with that. And I don't know if you want to call it institutional racism, but a lot of the folks who were involved in those decisions are people of color. Okay, I happen to have been
planning commissioner, and I will say, I made some decisions without that insight. And so I'm not condemning, I'm just pointing out, but we have a responsibility to start looking at ways how we change those laws so that it's more reflective of what we believe. And the color of wealth can certainly be all of us. And so I think that you being here, you know, is a statement. It's a statement of your background, your training, and now you're ready here to make people like me understand what the hell you're talking about. Because we will understand the term institutional racism, but not everybody else will. So you have to school them. You're not. Okay. So let me just challenge you to think about that. Talk to the powers that be, and why those things are important. And then if you belong to a corporation, ask yourself, you know, how many folks like us are on the board? And why not? And I appreciate Ford Foundation being here, because I ain't gonna bite the hand that's feeding us right now. But at the same time, we do have that responsibility. And in the media, I talked about that. We gotta push back. And in academia, look around and find out where the other folks of your caliber and of your education, of your attainment, who are white, I'll say it. And make sure that they say the same thing, because then we will be moving forward. So in government, we have a president who happens to be African American and white. But because he's that, doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to be perfect. And that's why he needs our help. And that the expectations got to be real, so that his changes can be real. Because he's a man that can think and understand. But we don't want to pin it on the ethnicity. We want to pin it on the ability for us to solve the problem and face it. It's not going to be easy. We can't be fooled by the moment. And yet, November was a time that made me weep, because I have the same expectation that you have, and that's change for our kids and for this country. So thank you for doing this, and we can change the attitudes and make that color of wealth a rainbow. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks and for your support over.
Can I say
That's
something for
good.
me?
Yeah. Yeah.
I never did this, man. You know, Barbara had to leave, and Barbara Lee had to leave. She and I and the Latinos, we have a tri-caucus. And the tri-caucus is made up of chairs of Nidia Velazquez, Barbara Lee, and myself. We number over 80 members. 80. That's leverage. Then we have a progressive caucus that we're part of. We number over 70. Do the math. We can do it, but we have to talk to those of us who are of the same heart, but some of us come from real tough districts. We have to figure out how we can help them do the right thing. So that's what this is all about. Pelosi wants to keep the numbers so that we have control of the committee. But there's a point in time where we have to do the hard vote, take the hard vote, and take the consequences for it. In 93, Clinton made all the Democrats vote for a balanced budget, which changed the complexion of how we do business. And Bush inherited a $5.6 trillion potential surplus for the 10 years, and he withers away. We just took a vote on the stimulus. All the Democrats voted for it, no Republicans. I don't want us to see in 2010 losing control of Congress because we did the right thing. That's why we need you. And Barbara would have said the same thing. And we're here shoulder to shoulder. No light breaks between our shoulders. So we need your help out there to say those things to media and to the people. And we gotta push back. And it's like the campaign slogan said, fired up,
Can't take no more.
ready to go.
Well, the House had a vote, so Congressman Elijah Cummings had to leave, as did Barbara Lee. But I do want to say something about Barbara Lee, since she is my congresswoman. And she also helped us get the room tomorrow. So they have definitely shown their support, as has Elijah Cummings.
When it comes to Social Security, we have to be very careful about extending the age of availability, because for black men, I mean, we don't get it anyway because we die too early. A lot of people don't even know that. A lot of people do not know that. A lot of people think that everything is fine when they saw Barack Obama become president. So everybody think that everybody is a Barack Obama and has the opportunities that Barack Obama had. Come on now. Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about. And so we need you. And I just saw my good friend Steny come in the room, and I know, Steny, one of the things that this group is concerned about, and I know Steny is one who is very sensitive to these issues, is trying to make sure that people of color have an opportunity to testify before hearings. Let me tell you something. I sit on the Joint Economic Committee. I've been on there for about 4 or 5 years. I've never seen a person of color testify. Not that I can recall. And I've often said that, and when I think about the Congress, I'm not going to hold you up because I know you got a lot to do. But when I think about the Congress...
Preach it, preach it.
When I think about the Congress, I would hate to think of the Congress without women. I mean, think about it. I would hate to even think about that. And the reason why I would hate to think about it that way is because we legislate for women. And the same thing goes with people of color. We need your testimony. We need your input. We need you telling the story and giving the other side of the story with a certain level of sensitivity, so that, not so that things will be swayed on the minority side, but so that there will be balance throughout our policy. That's what it's all about. I've told people often, I said, you don't have to do me any favors, just be fair. I'll be fine. Just be fair. And give my children what you would want for your children. You ain't got to tell me what you want for your children. Just give me, for my children, what you want for yours. And so I'm going to introduce Steny Hoyer, who is my friend. Steny has been in politics for a good while. Thank you so much. He is the number 2 guy in our Democratic side. And he has got to be one of the most well-versed folk in diplomacy within this body that I know. And I mean, he knows how to do it. And he's very, very, very effective. And if you've never heard him speak, you are in for a tremendous treat. And Steny, I want to thank you for being here, because you being here is very, very significant. And thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Steny Hoyer.
Let me say how honored I am to be here with my good friend Elijah Cummings, who does such an extraordinary job for Maryland and for our country, and who plays such a critically important role. But I'm not here for Elijah Cummings. Maya, on the other hand, is a different story. I heard Cummings talking about, I can't dream of a Congress without women in it. I can't dream of a life without women in it.
And we love you too.
Thank you so much. We'll talk about that later. The wealth gap gets wider. Washington Post today. I'm sure all of you read that. Oh, the author. See? What an effect it has on people. But I was stunned by this paragraph, the third paragraph of the article. Here's something being talked about much less. The gap between the wealth of white Americans and African Americans has grown. According to the Fed, for every dollar of wealth held by a typical white family, an African American family has only one dime. 10 years ago, it was $1 to 12 cents. So that, in other words, there has been a 20% erosion looked at from one standpoint. Now, that is obviously of concern to African Americans. But it needs to be of concern to every American. And the reason it needs to be of concern to every American is because we need to have every African American have the ability to be a robust consumer and saver, not just a survivor. Because if we have African Americans, this was Henry Ford said, why pay these people decently? You want somebody who could buy his cars. Frankly, there's some people in our society who believe that they can just skim off the top $1 zillion and leave the crumbs to the rest and think that their economy is going to be maintained. It's not. And we see that today. So I think that the work that you are about, Roger Clay, where's Roger Clay? Right here. Roger Clay is right up front. He's next to Maya, I noticed. Maya and I are traveling a couple of weeks from now. She's bringing Elijah with her. I want you to know. Our society is challenged today, and our president said that we had challenges and we were going to overcome them. I'm not new to the argument about disparities. Congressman Stokes and I, a wonderful member of the Congress of the United States, all of you know Stokes family, one of the great leading families in our country, Cleveland. Lou Stokes and I served on the Labor Health Appropriations Subcommittee for about 12, 14 years together, and then he retired. I served on it for 23 years. At that point in time, I represented a district that was about 40-45% African American. And Lou Stokes and I raised the issue together about NIH cohort groups for their internal and external extramural research. Talk about men and women. They were doing research on breast cancer with men. They were doing research on diseases that largely affect in a greater disparity African Americans. And they were doing those with white Americans. So Lou Stokes and I got involved in this, and we worked on it for about 5 or 6 or 7 years to make sure that those individuals who had proclivities for certain diseases were being included in the cohorts while studying those diseases. Now, in some cases, I think this is conscious racism. In other cases, and primarily, it is for a lack of consciousness. I don't think the doctors in NIH, frankly, were racist, but I think they were not sensitive to the challenge that confronted minorities in this country. That's what your conference is about. I congratulate you on this article. It caught my attention, and the Post thought it was important because they put it at the top page. Top of the page. Martin Luther King said that justice denied anywhere was justice denied everywhere. Economic discrimination and deprivation soon spreads everywhere. No man is an island. nobody who has wealth and a certain standard of living can maintain that for long if those around him see a deteriorating standard of living. While it is true that in some respects, sometimes a rising tide lifts all boats, it does not do so if certain people are left out of the tide's reach. And that's what's happening in America and around the world. And let me give you an example. I've gone to India. Some of you have gone to India. In India, there are more people living below the United Nations poverty level than in Africa and South America combined. Now, one wouldn't think of that. I would have thought that was not the case. Now, they have the largest middle class. They have over 1 billion people, so they are just huge. But when you drive from New Delhi to Agra, where the Taj Mahal is, you do not pass on that bus in 4.5 hours a single middle class community. Not one. In America, that's not the case. But too often, you ride and you see only middle class, because the pockets of poverty that are larger are hidden away, and people don't see it. And therefore, their consciousness is not picked by the tragedy in the richest country on the face of the earth, whether it is in urban areas or in rural areas, whether it is black or white. Those living in poverty without the kind of health care they need, without the kind of education they need, without the kind of uplift that they need for this country's opportunity.